Patriots! I call you to the Liberty Tree, the great oak that stands strong and firm and pulls its roots deep in its nourishment. And what I see here today warms my heart. You see, I think you have discovered in your science this thing that is called a DNA. What we called it at that time was posterity. We wanted what we were building to go deep into the roots of posterity. And what have I heard today from a young lady here who knows her history of England and the fact that firearms, arms in general, were those things that were required to have in your home. You see, after the great liberty that was fought for in that great golden revolution in England, it was required of the people to maintain their unalienable rights. Now, one of the things that many people do not understand about that, which was well noted by my young friend and colleague, Mr. Jefferson, was that these rights were the rights of the laws of natures and nature's God. You see, your rights are set forth by God. Those are the rights that you have that nobody can take away from you. So you have to listen closely to that inner portion of yourself to know that that is the value by which you have. One of the things that I like to remind people of is that my mother wanted me to be a minister. And at the age of 14, I went to Harvard. Now, Harvard was much different than what it is today. And when I went, I understood and could read and write Greek, Latin, and even French. I studied, though, at Harvard, not only those biblical truths, but what else I began to understand and study was the law and the Constitution of England. And at that early time, at that early age of about 20 years old, I wrote my first paper on the English rights. Those rights have not changed. Those were the rights, as you've heard from many people today, that are imbued into you, that becomes part of your American DNA. Those are the things that settle inside. But you know what's sad? As I have been brought back across time, across the land, what I see is that you have that DNA in you, but you don't necessarily have that history that backs it up, that tells you why those truths are true. We've heard a number of people today that have brought that together at one degree or another. But I would encourage, especially the young people that are here, because you see, what we did when we set up education was the idea that it wasn't that you would go to school and get a degree and become a worker. It was the idea that you would stand strong on your liberties as a citizen. That is your first order of what we thought education should be. Not to get a job, but to be a citizen and understand and preserve and maintain your rights and your liberties. Now, I have a few other things that I'd like to engage you with today, so you'll have to excuse me because of my age as I resort to things that my friend Mr. Franklin invented, a pair of spectacles. Now, as we look at this time in history, one of the things that I also wrote in 1772 was called The Rights of the Colonists. And these rights were what you've heard about: life, liberty, and what Mr. Jefferson defined in the Declaration of Independence, which I signed, was a pursuit of happiness. Well, that pursuit of happiness you heard very more clearly from Mr. Didier, which is property. And you have to understand that when we talked about property, that property was not just the ground that you stand on or that which you acquired, but it was your intellect. It was the words that came out of your mouth. It was the work of your hands. And what that work of your hands was, being taxed even in the days of England to us, was trying to hold that from us. The Stamp Act was to take away that work. It took away what we could do and transact business. That's no different than what you're seeing today with the rules and regulations that you are having coming out of not only the federal government, but what you have coming out of the House standing behind me. You see, what I feared most and what I talked about most was not that your liberty of arms would be taken away, but that human arts, and I do not mean the art of drawing pictures and stick figures and items like that that express not only beauty, but at times even silliness. No, I was talking about those that had a sense of reason and fallacious arguments that were intended to deceive you, to deceive the public. You see, one of the things that Lord North also said was that, you know, if we could take and we could get the colonies to clearly be distracted from the truths. Now, what they did at that time is they engaged the people in different types of art, different types of sports, different types of things that made them forget what their liberties and freedoms were all about. Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of that happen today. Not disparaging the joys that one gets from interacting in other social gatherings, but to the extent that it takes and it causes one to forget what their freedoms and liberties are all about. That is a distraction that is intended, that even started from my days. So that is what is the despicable thing that I looked at, and that's what I feared the greatest. I commented on it many, many times in many of my writings. You see, what we understood too is that that British Bill of Rights is what then took and draw closer as we came to the point of fighting for the liberties here in America. One of the things that a friend of mine from England, by writing, because he was a little senior to myself, and his writings were coming out on the great works that he did on the English Constitution and law, Mr. Blackstone, he took and he talked about it that when we are violated or attacked, the subjects in England are entitled, first, to regular administration and free course of justice in a court of law. Next, to the right of petitioning the king and parliament for redress or grievances. And lastly, to the right of having the use of arms for self-preservation and defense. You know that. But many don't. Many have taken and been deceived by the words of legislators, by the words of other groups. They have been deceived. But you need to know that this is your substantial rights to protect your freedoms and your liberties, which you've heard today. Now, one of the other things that was interesting that was commented on briefly, but you didn't hear it maybe, is that whole idea of standing armies. When we thought about that, and we wrote that as part of the Constitution and the truth of what we understood, one of the things that you may not know is that in England, at the same time that we were fighting for our rights, and they sent the military, especially into Massachusetts and Boston, because they did not care for the stance that we were taking, there were riots in England. There was upsurgence in England. And never once was the military ever used on those citizens in England. But on we citizens in the American colonies, they used troops. And not only that, they used foreign troops. Be wary of that. Be cautious of that. Pay attention to that.